Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We are your hosts, Jack Stern and Spencer Michaelis, coming to you every Friday with all of the latest news, recaps, and analysis relating to all things Brewers. This week, we're going to be going over the start of the Brewers' longest road trip of the season, and it has not been a great one so far. The Brewers have, as of this recording, played two series so far, one against the Astros, one against the Miami Marlins. They have dropped both of those series. They're 2-4 so far on the road trip. Still have a few games left to kind of right the ship a little bit before they return home. But we've kind of talked about this on some past episodes. You're going to have ebbs and flows in the season. Right now, we're seeing a little bit more of the downs, just not a great run that the Brewers are on right now. Seems like they can't get both components of their game together at the same time. We've seen some higher scoring games where the pitching hasn't quite been there and some good pitching games where the offense really hasn't been there to support them. Spencer, is that kind of the thought that you've had so far just going through this week with how things have gone?
100%. It kind of feels like for most of the season, the Brewers have had pretty good luck in that regard in terms of days when the bats aren't doing well, the pitching is able to pick it up. And when the bats are going crazy and the pitching isn't doing great, it just seems to line up a lot. And on this road trip, it just hasn't lined up like that as much. And like you mentioned, that's part of a long season. It's what's going to happen every once in a while. So we'll talk about those 6 games and then preview the last 3 of this road trip as well.
We will. We'll start that conversation about these 6 games right now, starting with that 3-game series in Houston against the Astros. The Brewers dropping 2 out of 3 in that series when they were playing the Astros. And in game 1, the Astros coming out on top 5-4. Freddie Peralta got the start in this ball game. Not his finest effort. We'll kind of dive into that a little bit as we keep going. Jake Bauers, though, hitting a solo home run to get the scoring started for the Brewers in the second inning. Peralta pretty quickly giving that right back by allowing a go-ahead home run to Jake Meyers in the bottom half of that inning. And then it was a similar story a few innings later. Joey Ortiz giving the Brewers the lead once again with a 3-run home run in the fourth. And then Freddie Peralta giving up a go-ahead home run to Jeremy Pena in the bottom of the fifth. Houston would then hang on to win this one 5-4, like we said. Going back to those 2 home runs that Peralta allowed, that Meyers home run, he fell behind 3-1 in that count, was missing with some low fastballs, not hitting his spots there, not the most competitive pitches after getting into that at bat. And then he hung a slider that was about as close to the middle of the plate as you can get. It was maybe up a little bit, maybe slightly in, but right over the heart of the plate, basically not where you want to be throwing a slider. Meyers did not miss that one. And for that home run hit by Jeremy Pena, Freddie actually got ahead of him 1-2. And then again, just some not super competitive misses after getting ahead in the count that brought it to 3-2, missing with some waste pitches that he was trying to get down in the zone, some breaking balls that just not able to land. And then Pena, it looked like he was looking for something at the bottom of the zone, knowing how that at bat was unfolding. The pitch that Peralta threw there to give up that home run, I don't think it was the worst pitch. It wasn't nearly as bad as the one that Meyers hit a few innings prior. But again, it was like at the knees essentially, but it was about right down the middle of the plate. And again, it looked like just with the way that sequence was unfolding, Pena was looking for something down there. Maybe if you try to go back up with a fastball, you can get it by him, or at least get him in a spot where the swing doesn't look quite as prepared for the pitch that he got down there. Spencer, were there any thoughts that you had just about the way Freddie was throwing the ball that night, the way he was mixing pitches, executing, just what wasn't there for him that things kind of went south?
I think it was a continuation of what we've been seeing with him over the course of, I guess I'd say, a struggling few weeks since that suspension. Really, he's just not commanding anything super well. He wasn't up until this point. Obviously, that may have changed a bit at the end of the 6 games we're going to talk about here. But in this game, it just felt like you talked about the Meyers homer. That's just a terrible pitch. It was, when you're playing in a place like Houston, missing in with the breaking ball or over the middle or inside part of the plate is just asking for trouble against the righty, because it does not take that much to elevate a ball and hit it out to left. And Meyers, he didn't necessarily crush that ball, but it would have been a homer in most stadiums. Pena's, like you mentioned, it really wasn't an awful spot, not to the degree of Meyers, but it felt like, you mentioned possibly going back to a high fastball there. I would have liked to do that, regardless of, he might have fouled it off, he might have been able to hang, he might have been able to get the ball in play, but it would have been nice to kind of change the eye level on that pitch, even if he did foul it off, and then maybe you go back to the slider. But it kind of felt like he was just looking for something down. And obviously, it's hard to get in the head of a hitter in that spot. You might be thinking he's expecting the fastball, so you're going to the slider. Like, there's a lot of back and forth and mind games in that type of situation. But it did feel like the slider was something they were sitting on as a team for most of the game. Like, they seemed to be looking for it. And they got a pretty decent amount of good swings on it, obviously the 2 homers, but I don't know. It did feel like he maybe went away from the fastball a little bit too much, but he also was missing down with it a lot. So when that's happening, it's kind of hard for you to want him to use the fastball very often, because that's where that pitch is going to get hit. So in totality, I feel like it was mostly just he had bad command all game, and they obviously happened to make him pay on a couple of them, but it wasn't like he was pitching well and just got unlucky with a couple mistakes. He was missing spots for the majority of the game.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of something that we touched on a little bit last week when we were talking about Freddie Peralta. This is just kind of the way that we've seen him pitch for several years now, and it really hasn't been any different this year. Just these stretches where not even if the command is great, but if it's good enough where the stuff just plays so well that you get really off balance swings. But he's also going to go through stretches that sometimes are just as prolonged as the highs, if not longer, where he's in these moments where the command is not there. Even when he's throwing strikes, he's missing the target by quite a lot. And I think that's some of what we saw in that outing against Houston again. So just another start for Peralta that didn't really go the way he wanted to. We kind of talked about it last week. Like I said, he had a really strong start, and then things have gone in the opposite direction the last few weeks. We'll get to his start in Miami later in the program, though, because that was a step in the right direction for sure, but not a great day for him in game 1 against Houston. Game 2, the Brewers coming back to win that one 4-2 over the Astros. Bryce Wilson got the ball in that game, and he was good enough. I think he was what you would hope to get from Bryce Wilson. He went 4 2/3 in that game. 5 hits allowed, 2 earned runs, walked a guy, 3 strikeouts. The one walk was big for me in that game just because he struggled so much with the control the last 2 times out. So to get that walk tally down to a point where he's not allowing a lot of free base runners, I think that was a very big deal for him in that outing. The highlight of this game, though, was William Contreras hitting a go-ahead home run against Justin Verlander on a 13-pitch at-bat. The final pitch of that at-bat, Contreras getting a fastball up, driving it, giving the Brewers the lead in that game. They'd go on to win. Justin Verlander had a very interesting quote about that battle as well, courtesy of Brian McTaggart, who's the Astros beat writer. I'm just going to read this quote really quickly. Verlander said, "Great at bat. We got in a fight. He won. I can go home and put my head on my pillow tonight. I made a bunch of good pitches. He's one of the best hitters in baseball, and he got me." And I thought that was a really cool quote to hear from a guy who has that much experience, who's faced a lot of hitters, one of the most experienced starting pitchers in baseball, just knowing that he got into a spot where Contreras just beat him. And I think if you look at some of the reactions that Astros fans had to that, they were kind of saying that it was a cop-out or he was trying to make excuses for not pitching better. But if you go through and you actually watch that sequence, like Verlander did pitch him pretty tough, especially early in the at bat. He was mixing the breaking ball in with the fastball, and he was throwing really, really well executed breaking balls early in that at bat that Contreras didn't bite on. He had the one that he almost went for, but he was able to lay off, and then Verlander tried it a couple more times and he didn't bite. And that's what really forced Verlander to start coming back into the strike zone with those fastballs. Contreras just hanging in there until he was able to get one that leaked a little bit more over the plate than some of the other ones he had seen earlier in that at bat. And he was able to drive it. And this is what I'd like to see a little bit more of in baseball. Like, we do get these quotes, but whenever you're thinking about just any kind of matchup or any kind of event that happens in a baseball game between pitcher and hitter, like, you need to be able to evaluate it from both perspectives if you really want to have a holistic view of it. Like, Verlander pitched very well at the start of that at-bat, and Contreras also did a very nice job at the plate during that at-bat, especially as it dragged on. He kind of wore him out and got him to the point where it was like, well, I'm just going to try to get a fastball by you here because I'm not going to walk you. I'm going to make you get it against my best stuff, and Contreras did it. So credit to him. But I think just being able to kind of recognize that, like, game recognizes game. And I think if you're going to look at that at bat, you just got to be able to say, you know, Verlander did a nice job early, but Contreras did just as nice of a job, if not better, as that at bat wore on. I didn't see this at bat live. I had to go back and watch it later because I was busy that night. Spencer, did you watch this one live as it was going down?
Ironically, this was one of like 3 at bats I watched live during the entire game. I was at a wedding on Saturday night. Shout out to Danny and Nicole. But it was the speeches had just ended, so I was not interrupting anything. I promise. I was paying attention to the wedding, doing what I'm supposed to do. Anyway,
I don't know. I'd like to imagine that you were like sitting there during the ceremony, just streaming the Brewers on the Bally Sports app.
No. The ceremony happened earlier. This was at the reception. Anyway,
okay. All right.
It was everything wrapped up, and I looked at my phone just to see the score. I went to the MLB at bat app, and I saw that Contreras was in a 3-2 count. He had just gotten to it. I was like, well, I'll toss it on quickly. So I opened the Bally app.
You didn't watch the whole at bat live?
Well, I did after. I rewound and watched all of it. But
right, but that wasn't my question. My question was, did you watch the at bat? I guess you watched part of the at bat live.
I watched half the at bat live. Anyway, Let me tell my story. He went and Verlander did mix a curve and a changeup in during the 3-2 count. Like he did mix one of each of those in. But like you said, once he got to the point where he was just, I think Verlander knew it was his last batter and he was not going to walk his last batter. He did not want to do that. He knew he was coming out. In that inning, the Brewers forced him over 40 pitches total. So Contreras had a long at bat, but everybody was seeing a lot of pitches in that inning. And he just got into that mode where it's like, well, you better beat me. I'm going to make you beat me. And good pitchers do that a lot. Like somebody like Verlander is capable of saying, here's my best, beat it. And if you do, he'll acknowledge that you beat him and move on. And I think there's a really good mentality part to that for every pitcher to be able to do that. But he also acknowledged that Contreras is one of the best hitters in baseball, which is a pretty nice compliment to get from somebody with as much experience and as many accolades as Verlander has. But the thing for me was I could not believe he kept going back to the fastball while I was watching it. You could tell Contreras was starting to time it up. And I do think there was almost a little bit of an ego thing with Verlander there where, like I'm saying, I don't think he wanted to walk him and have someone else try to clean up his mess. So he said, I'm finishing this inning or I'm going to give up a hit here. And he wore down. The velo went down a tick or two as the at-bat went on. And yeah, I mean, William did a fantastic job getting to a bunch of pitches on like the up and out corner, just really at the top of the zone a lot. And then he just missed down a little bit further on the one. And just, I was trying to think of an at bat that was as impressive as that. And I think you got to go back to 2018 with Jesus Aguilar's walk-off against the Marlins, which I know Jack will enjoy reminiscing on.
We just came up on like the 6-year anniversary of that. It was a few days ago. I saw someone tweeted about it. I think it was J.R. Radcliffe at the Journal Sentinel tweeted about it, how that was like a few days ago. I can't remember which day it was, but like 6 years ago, which time flies.
Yeah. 2018 was 6 years ago. So that adds up. The math is mathing on that one. But yeah, it was just an incredible at bat. And it was, frankly, he didn't have a great series at the plate. He, that might have been his only hit in the series now that I think about it, or maybe he had one more.
It was one of his only hits. He had, I didn't write it down in the notes here, but he had a stretch of 2 games in a row where he did not get a hit. I can't remember if it was in that Astros series or I think it might have been at the end of the Houston series and carried into game 1.
Yeah.
In Miami. I think that's when it was.
That would make sense.
But don't quote me on that. I don't know everything, unfortunately, but we'll make do with what we actually have written down here. You got any more comments on that at bat, Spencer?
No, just very impressive. I was happy I happened to turn it on for that at bat. So
I guess the last thought I have is you talked about Verlander still going back to that fastball. That's like a really interesting debate for me when you get to that point, because sometimes it can be hard to perceive the line of how much has he timed up this pitch. Like sometimes you don't know if that next swing is going to be like, if you have a guy who's repeatedly just fouling it back, like, he's getting closer, but he's also not there yet. So like, it's always an interesting game for me of like, how far do you want to push it? Because he's not there yet. You just don't know if next swing is going to be the one where he times it up, or if it's going to be maybe 2 swings down the line. But I do think in that case, too, it was, if you look at the way that sequence unfolded, the ones that he was fouling straight back, I think they were like 96, like outside, like up and out, outer third of the strike zone elevated. And then that last one he got to was 94, 95, like down the middle, still up, but in terms of where it was left to right, it was over the middle of the plate. So that probably plays into it, too, a little bit. But yeah, just a really nice job by William Contreras on that at bat. Then Wilson came out in the fifth, and Hobie Milner, Elvis Peguero, Brian Hudson, and Trevor McGill got it done the rest of the way, combining for 4 1/3 scoreless innings of relief. Really nice work from the bullpen. That was a theme for most of this road trip so far. And it was not so much a theme in game 3, which we'll get to coincidentally. We just said that that's going to be a theme for the rest of the road trip. But the game after was the one game that was an exception. It started with a Colin Ray not special. That's how I described it in our notes here. He went 4 1/3, 8 hits allowed, 5 earned runs, walked 4 guys, 5 strikeouts. He actually did settle in a little bit after giving up 4 of those runs in the first inning. It seemed like maybe we were going to be on our way to another Colin Ray gets hit a little bit early, but he makes some adjustments and finds a way to get it done, which has kind of become his MO as a member of the starting rotation. But he got into the 5th inning, walked Alvarez to lead off the start of the inning, Yordan Alvarez, that is. He came around to score. At that point, it was, we just got to pull the plug and go to the pen. At this point, pitch count was getting up there as well. It's really just the 4 walks for him. He's always going to be a guy who gets hit a little bit just because none of the stuff is good, but we've talked about how well he is able to mix it and adjust his game plan based on what he needs to do. But none of that's going to be especially helpful if he's just not in the strike zone. And that was what we saw in this game. The 4 walks, a little bit out of the ordinary for him. If he can just get him back throwing more strikes, getting in the strike zone a little bit more, should be a little better. At the same time, that ERA is now over 4, which is probably where it should be, just in terms of the quality of pitching he's doing. I think we've been pretty consistent in saying, he's a nice, solid back of the rotation arm, but the results that we were seeing early in the season, probably not sustainable for him. Hopefully now things kind of level out a little bit because he has had a couple of maybe not correction outings is the way I should describe it, but just outings where now everything is kind of at a point where you expect to see it about 7 weeks into the season. So the Brewers, however, not going down quietly on the offensive side of this game. They were able to put up 3 in the top of the 7th inning on basically a series of ground balls that either were infield hits or found holes, but it was a rally. They came right back into this game. I believe that made it a 1-run game at the time, or was it 2 runs?
It was a 2-run game.
It was 2. That's right. Because this
the track.
Yeah. Well, I remember this now because it became a point of discussion because immediately after that rally, Mitch White came into the game with the Brewers still down by 2, and he gave up 3 runs to give that rally right back. And it became a little bit of a debate among some people online whether that was a good time for Mitch White to pitch. I think we're both pretty adamant that that was a good time for Mitch White to pitch. You really can't burn one of your high leverage relievers in that spot. And again, this kind of goes back to this is something that we were critical about in terms of Pat Murphy's bullpen management early in the year, because it did seem like the first couple weeks of the season, this would have been a moment where, he kind of adopts the mindset that a lot of fans seem to have of just being hungry for today, and seeing that his team was able to rally back and make it a close game, and then, bring in one of his higher leverage guys to try to keep it there. But the reality is that's not really a high leverage spot. Even after bringing that deficit back to 2, you're not especially likely to come back and win that game. You're down 2 against one of the better bullpens in baseball. Your win probability is not very high there, and you just can't afford to burn a high leverage guy in moments like that, because those extra innings that you're asking out of guys are going to add up both on the season, and it could also mean that just in the near future they're available for a moment where you actually need them a little bit more to capitalize on a win that's right in front of you. So you just can't afford to bring in someone in that spot. And it's got to be Mitch White's innings. That's the role that he's on the roster to fill as of this recording. And he was already warming up before they were able to scratch across those runs. He was going to pitch that inning unless they tied or took the lead. I thought it was the right call. I know some people didn't like it, but that's just the way you got to handle things if you're going to pace guys out, right, Spencer?
100%. Like you said, this is something we've been talking about from the beginning of the season, and it's something that Murph has made strides on. I think he's a lot better with handling these types of things than he was early on. And when it comes to White, I mean, the issue there is that he's just not very good. Like, you can be upset. You need your back. When I say back end of the pen guys, I'm obviously not referring to the high leverage back end, but your worst pen guys need to be able to go out and at least get outs. They don't need to be great. They can be 4 ERA type guys. They're going to give up runs. They're not going to probably be huge strikeout guys or anything. But White and Thiago Vieira, who Vieira got DFA'd earlier this week, but
It was
those two
after
just
this game, actually. Not
yes, it
not the
was
night
right
up.
after.
It was the next day, but
Yeah,
this would be his last appearance as a Brewer because he pitched in this game and then was DFA'd before the start of that Miami series.
right. So I don't want to speculate, but I can't imagine that Mitch White, if he continues to perform the way he is too long for his roster spot at the moment. But it's hard to. I don't like using the word punt, even though I think that's kind of what you're doing in a way. In reality, I would say you're lessening the odds of you winning the game when you put in somebody like Mitch White versus a high leverage guy. But the odds already weren't great in this game. And over the course of 162 games, you just have to be willing to do that sometimes. And they still could have come back. And Mitch White might have gotten out of the inning if he wasn't playing in Houston, where Kyle Tucker hits a ball an inch over the wall on the Crawford box and it's only gone in one stadium out of 30. Like, you never know what might happen after that, but you still have to be willing to play those odds once in a while. Just over the course of the whole season, it's just you can't always go to a high leverage guy in those types of spots. So I was happy with what Murph ended up doing. And I hope it's something he continues to do in those types of situations.
Yeah, I think in a lot of these games recently now, that's where we've seen things handled a little bit differently for Murphy in a productive way, in a better way. It seemed, like I said, just early in the year, he was being a little bit more aggressive with using some guys in those kinds of situations instead of saving them for higher leverage moments or going to some of his lower leverage guys in those kind of spots just to eat those innings. I do think we're at a point where I had said after this game, like Vieira probably needed to have his time up. Mitch White not far behind. Vieira did get cut after that game. And yeah, I off the top of my head, I haven't really looked into the numbers or anything, but it seems like a big difference between this year's bullpen and some past bullpens is the quality of those B guys. It used to be, especially under a lot of these recent teams, your B guys were your Luis Perdomo type guys who I wouldn't say they were great pitchers, but Luis Perdomo in like the 25, 30 innings he threw that year for the Brewers, I think he had an ERA under 4. Like maybe the peripherals weren't great behind it, but like he was also getting a lot of ground balls. They're just guys who are not they're still a good bet to throw a scoreless inning more often than not. And that's really what it comes down to. Like, especially if you're going to be a guy who needs to eat innings, you can't be having long innings, let alone innings where you're giving up a lot of runs, but just long innings too, where you're struggling to get outs. That's something we saw a lot from Vieira too, especially with the walk problems that he's had throughout his career and this season. So we already had a little bit of a shakeup in that mix. Thiago getting DFA'd after this game. The Brewers then calling up one of their starting pitching prospects, Bradley Blaylock, coming up straight from Double-A Biloxi. So he was in the bullpen for the Brewers' first game in Miami. And we'll talk a little bit about how that bullpen mix ended up shaking out for that game. We just talked about how we were happy to see Pat Murphy maybe take his foot off the gas a little bit and use Mitch White in that situation when he may not have used it earlier. Now it's time to spend 5 minutes talking about how Pat Murphy, in our eyes, did not do a good job managing game 1 of the Miami Marlins series. So the most egregious thing that caught some controversy came at the end of this game, but we'll start at the beginning because Joe Ross in game 1, leaving after just 1 inning on the mound with back strain. He was placed on the IL. Brewers are hoping it'll be a minimum stint, but we'll see how that all pans out. And Ross comes out of the game. Jared Koenig is the first one out of the bullpen. I think that made sense because you can't just throw Blaylock in there. That can't be the situation you put a guy in his major league debut as an injury replacement where he needs to just sprint out of the bullpen. And they tell you can have as many as you want once you get on that mound, but everyone knows that guys are going to be rushing a little bit. You just don't want to be out there throwing, 20 warm-up tosses on the mound. So going to Koenig there, I thought was the right call. He was able to give him a couple innings. I was assuming after that, that's when we were going to see Blaylock kind of come in and cover some innings because I think that when you get to that point, again, this kind of goes back to that conversation about just finding the balance between trying to win now, but also pacing guys and just making sure that your staff is in a good spot. Murph still went for the win in this one. And that's not to say that by throwing Blaylock in there again, like I don't think you're punting that game. But it's just a matter of what your priority is in that moment. Is your priority play this one to win at all costs, or is your priority just we need to cover some innings tonight now so that we're in a good spot to win games the rest of this road trip? And at the end of the day, I don't think one day like this ended up hurting the Pen too much, especially because you do have the off day on the day we're recording this on Thursday. So that does help a little bit just with resetting some workloads. That was a big part of what made Murph's bullpen management early in the season interesting as well. It was coming in the midst of this stretch where they did not have any off days. So it's a
Yeah.
little bit of a different situation now. But every reliever in the Brewers bullpen pitched in this game except Bradley Blaylock. So it was interesting that the one guy who was stretched out ended up not getting an inning. But it was extra unfortunate because the Brewers burned all of their best relievers in a game that they would end up losing 3-2. They had a lead going to the ninth. Trevor McGill came in trying to get the save, and he blew his first save opportunity of the year. Really wasn't his fault. He did his job. He was getting weak contact in that inning and a little bit of swing and miss. He got the first 2 outs pretty quickly, but then it went single, steal, and then a bloop single into right. Jackson Churio was coming in on the ball, not with a ton of intensity, especially at the end. You could tell that his mindset really just for that play was I need to stay behind this ball and keep it in front of me, make sure that it doesn't go for extra bases. That ended up tying the game. This was a game-tying single, but Murph kind of said after the game that he would have to look at the play just to see how it all went down from different angles. But he came back the next day and said, yeah, Jackson needs to lay out for that one. And that seemed to be a consensus among a lot of people. Churio needed to dive for that ball. I don't know if he comes up with that if he dives. The catch probability was, I think it was like 0 based on where he started. Like he was playing deep. They had him playing no doubles in that situation. But it was, I think you still need to lay out for that one. I don't think the risk of what could happen if you don't come up with that ball is as bad as Churio thinks it was, especially because it was a softly hit fly ball. Like, even if you don't keep that ball in front of you perfectly, it's not going anywhere. It's not like this is the Sal Frelick play in Cincinnati where it's a sinking liner, and if you miss that, yeah, that's going to roll all the way to the wall. Like this is a bloop fly ball. When that ball comes down, even if you don't catch it, it's kind of just going to stay there. Or maybe it gets away from you by a few feet, but it's not anything where it's going to magically turn a single, into a triple or an inside the park. Worst case scenario, it turns into a double. And even then, like you're still in a spot where the upside is you catch the ball and the game is over, you win. The downside is they tie it up and the winning run hasn't scored yet. So I think that just with that in mind, like that was a ball that he needed to lay out for, don't you think?
100% agree. I think I tweeted it at the time, but it is one of those things where it's a young guy and you could tell he was afraid he didn't want to make a quote unquote mistake, just go after a ball and potentially lose the game. And it is turf. Their surface is turf. So I'm sure they were preaching all week, like, hey, the ball's going to skip when it hits the ground. You got to make sure you're taking deeper angles. You got to make sure you're not taking too big of a risk because the ball is going to roll. But like you said, this was just a pop-up and it was not going anywhere. Like if he dives and misses, yes, I'd be shocked if it's not a double, but I don't think it's anything more than that. And like you said, in that spot, the risk completely, the reward outweighs the risk because you could win the game and be done and the game's over. But I will go back to, I don't really understand playing no doubles defense in that spot like they were. So one, yes, he should have dove, but two, I just don't think he ever should have been that far away from that ball to begin the play. And the tying run is on second base. Trevor McGill not exactly fast to the plate. I think people are going to steal on him when they get on for the most part. And this, I don't remember, was it Otto Lopez who had the cheap single? I can't remember who it was, but he did end up stealing second base immediately following this situation. So to me, I think you got to play a little bit more shallow and have the opportunity to come up and make a throw on a single through the infield to try and win the game or keep the guy at third. Whatever, you need to be able to try and cut that run down at the plate. So playing at least Churio almost on the warning track there just doesn't make sense to me to begin with. And yeah, that 0% catch probability is based on him being that deep and having to run so far. And to be honest, it means he got a really good jump and he took a really good route that we're debating if he could even have potentially gotten to it. And Murph even mentioned that their internal metrics that they use for that type of stuff said it would have been a really hard catch. They didn't have it as 0, but it sounded like it was pretty unlikely in their internal metrics that anyone could get to that. But to me, that was a lesson that Churio needed to learn as a young player. Like, you got to take that risk in that spot. But two, I would question why they were ever having him play that deep in that spot to begin with. So I would say a little bit of that at least falls on the coaching staff, along with what happened at the end of it with Churio.
So that's already two things that we've talked about now from this game that you can. I'm not mad at Murph or the coaching staff or like strongly disagreeing over or either one of those things. So we're talking about the decision to go aggressive with the bullpen after Ross left, and then the positioning of Churio in the ninth. I think those are ones that you can have like debates about, and if you talk it through, it can be. I can still see what you're going for here, especially like with the bullpen. So Koenig came in, and then was it Piamps who came in after that?
Yes.
I think it was Koenig, Piamps, and then they had a lead at that point. So at that point, it's we have to go to the leverage guys now because we have a lead and we got to win this game. For me, the decision with that came more going to Piamps instead of Blaylock after Koenig. If I was managing this game, I would have said Koenig, then you go Blaylock, just try to cover innings here. And if we can still win this game, great. If not, we're still in a really good position moving forward. But instead, you could tell kind of in the way it was working out, like Murph wanted to keep that game close more than anything else. And again, you can have a little bit of a debate about it. I think that the fact that, like I said, there was an off day coming up means it wasn't like it's more viable than it would be earlier in the year when they were playing all of these games without any time off. So I can see why you would approach it that way. And I think this is kind of just his MO as a manager. Like I think he is trying to find a good balance between the win in front of us and think about tomorrow, but you can tell like the way he publicly presents it, it's much more of a win the game in front of us, worry about tomorrow. And he is thinking about the game tomorrow. Like I've talked to him about this stuff. He is thinking about the game tomorrow. So I'm not gonna act like he's completely writing all this off. He does think about this stuff, and he's kind of showed the way that he plans for this stuff. But I think that the way he balances it is it maybe tips a little bit more toward the win now side than what we've seen the past few years from the previous leadership in the dugout. But that's kind of a conversation that we've had in previous episodes, and it'll probably come up a few times as we keep going here. But really, the moment when things just kind of went like this is just bad managing at the end is when we got into extra innings, and the Brewers coming up in the top of the 10th against Tanner Scott. You have that go-ahead run starting the inning on second base. Christian Yelich comes up, tries to bunt, and whenever Yelich squares to drop one down, you always have that thought in the back of your head, maybe he's trying to do it for a hit just because he's good at doing it for a hit. So when Yelich squares the bunt, I don't really think a whole lot of it because that thought is always in my mind. He might be doing it as a way to get on because he's very good at that. So Yelich squared twice. Both pitches are balls. He ends up pulling back. He gets on base on a walk. And then you have Joey Ortiz coming up, and Joey Ortiz, at this point, you could very clearly tell that there was a bunt call on because not only is Joey Ortiz squaring at every pitch, he got ahead in the count 2-0 again. So at this point, Tanner Scott has not thrown a pitch over the plate or especially close to the plate. It's a 2-0 count. You've got the go-ahead run on second base and a runner on first. There's nobody out. He still squares again, and it's a pitch that, again, is nowhere close to the strike zone, but he gets it down. He executes the bunt. But you can tell, like, in that moment, if that's a pitch that he is trying to bunt, you know that there's a call on. Like, it's been called from the dugout. You need to get this down. When that call comes from the dugout, it becomes priority number one for the batter. No matter where the pitch is, no matter what's going on, get that bunt down. And he did it. They should not have had him do it. That it's not smart. I'm sorry. Like, this is going to be one of the things that I feel pretty strongly about, and I think you do as well, Spencer. It's not the way to play that situation. And Murphy explained after the game what he was thinking. I disagree very strongly with the thinking. He was playing for one run there. You don't play for one run when you're the road team in extra innings. If you come out of that situation with one run, you're starting the bottom of the 10th with the winning run at the plate. If you're the home team, I'm okay with playing for one. That's a spot where I'm okay with you bunt the guy over to third because then a sac fly gets him in. And this comes back to like run probability. Just the odds of scoring a run based on the base out situation that you're in. If you have runners on first and second with nobody out, you're in a pretty good spot to have a big inning. If you bunt them to second and third with one out, you're still in a position where you can get some across, but the average number of runs that is scored in that inning decreases if you switch to that situation, because I understand that you have two guys in scoring position, but at the end of the day, the fact that you now have one less opportunity to get that single that you need, that ends up hurting you more than just the fact that you only need one single to drive in two guys. It's the way it shakes out, like the pros and cons and the way it all comes together. What you lose in losing that one out ends up mattering more than what you gain from moving those guys up. So that's a situation where you bunt those guys over, you get in that spot. Your odds of scoring one run is higher because you can get them in with a sac fly. Your odds of scoring multiple runs goes down. So you're playing for one there, which in and of itself, I don't agree with when you're the road team in extra innings. But also, just if you also consider the context of this specific situation, Tanner Scott had not thrown a ball over the plate. You had him on the ropes. And this is a guy who has struggled with walks at time. If you're going to beat him, it's going to be because he's not throwing strikes, because the stuff is absurd. The strikeout rate is absurd. He doesn't give up a lot of hits. If you are going to beat him, you're going to beat him because he's not in the strike zone. That's when he struggles. And he was not in the strike zone. He hadn't gotten a ball over the plate, and he still didn't get a ball over the plate to Ortiz. And they said, here's a free out. And after that, he seemed to lock it in a little bit more. He found the strike zone again. He was able to get Willy Adames and then Gary Sanchez lining out to end the inning. Just not good management. You also know, too, that you have Mitch White coming in the next inning. And no disrespect to Mitch White, but like that's not a good reliever that's coming in. So that even then, too, like the philosophy of you need to try to play for more than one because you've got the winning run coming up if you only score one in that inning. Then you add in the fact that you have the worst reliever in the bullpen, unless you want to say it's Blaylock because he has no experience, the worst reliever in the bullpen coming in on top of that. It does not make any sense to play for one run there, in my mind. It just doesn't. So it was bad management. And then sure enough, you get to the top or the bottom of the 10th, excuse me. This one really wasn't Mitch White's fault. He didn't even get a chance to pitch, really. They intentionally walked two guys. So they did an intentional walk, and then there was a steal. So then at that point, you got to do another intentional walk because you're just trying to set up the double play after they sacrificed. So he got one out on a sac bunt, two intentional walks, and then a walk-off single by Josh Bell. That just all happened so quickly, and he threw so few competitive pitches that you really can't evaluate that outing whatsoever. So this really doesn't have anything to do with Mitch White in terms of the way it all ended up playing out, but just bad management, just not putting your team in a good spot at the end to win that game. And that's all you can ask for of a manager from a strategic standpoint. Just with the tools you have in front of you, just did you do the best you could from a process standpoint to put your team in the best position to win that game? Pat Murphy thinks he did. He didn't with the way he played that.
No, he did not. And like you said, I feel like the biggest part of all of this is the culmination of all these things happening at once. Like, I would have disagreed with bunting in the first place. I really disagreed with bunting once Tanner Scott had thrown 6 straight balls to open the inning. Like you said, this is a guy who's walked almost 9 per 9. Like, he's walking almost the same amount of batters as he has innings pitched this year. But he also strikes a lot of people out. And one thing you didn't even mention, and Willy Adames is striking out less this year than he has in the past, but he is a strikeout threat at the plate almost every time. He's not exactly somebody that you can absolutely rely on to get a ball in play in that type of situation. So even though you're playing for one there, I wouldn't be banking on him being able to get the job done in that spot and hit a sac fly. And once he strikes out, now it's the defense is in a great spot. All they need to do is get out under any circumstances. And it wasn't even a bad swing by Gary Sanchez. He got jammed, but he had a decent swing on it. And I thought for a split second they might get bailed out and that it might fall in for a 2-run single. But it's a bad process. It doesn't make sense to begin with. Like you mentioned with Yelich, lefty, a tough lefty. If he's doing it in the form of bunting for a hit, like it looked like he kind of was on the first pitch especially, I've got no problem with him doing that. The issue becomes, and the weirdest part to me is that after it got to 2-0 for Yelich, he pulled back and he was ready to swing. So then Ortiz comes up, and I thought the same thing was going to happen. I was mad that he was bunting on the first 2 pitches, and I was like, all right, now it's 2-0. He's going to get a chance to swing because why wouldn't he? And then he squares again, and like you said, he bunted a ball, and you could say he should have pulled back. But when you go up there with the intent to get a sac bunt down, your job is to get the sac bunt down. And if he would have popped that pitch up, you could say, why didn't he pull back? But he got the job done. He did what he was supposed to do. He bunted it pretty perfectly, honestly, towards the third baseman. There was no play at any other base. Like, he did exactly what he's supposed to do, but it's just not the right thing to do from a process standpoint. And Mitch White coming in, you probably need to be up 2 for you to have a real chance, where that guy in second's probably scoring. It's a pretty good chance of that. So even if you get your 1, you're playing for 1. Like, do you really think he's going to go out and shut him down with a guy on second and not allow that guy to score? Because I sure wouldn't be expecting that out of him. So it was just, that was a very frustrating game. And I could even point to one more thing that I was a little annoyed by. Josh Bell is like one of the biggest double play, like ground into double play threats in the entire league this year. There was an out. I would have had the middles back, and they might have had a chance to turn 2 on that if Turang had been back. Like, I would not have had the middles in for that play either. So that ball sneaks through in that spot because Turang is so far up. It just was a lot of stuff that I just didn't agree with in this game. Like we've said other times, we've critiqued him. This is not, we just talked about a very good job that he did earlier in this road trip, but this game, honestly, if I'm being fully transparent, this is exactly what I worried about when the Brewers made the hiring. And I kind of anticipated seeing stuff like this a lot over the course of the season. And the fact that it's pretty much the first game that I've seen real issues, it's not that big a deal. Managers make mistakes. They have games where they're just honestly a little off of their game. But again, like we've always said, I really hope he learns from a lot of these decisions, because if he continues to have that type of process as the away team in extra inning games, the Brewers are not going to win many extra inning games on the road. They're just not. It's not a good way to attack that type of situation. So, yeah, just overall pretty rough game for Murph and really the whole coaching staff, because he doesn't control, like I talked about, I don't think he's necessarily the one making the call on infield or outfield positioning. That's probably running through assistants. So the whole coaching staff seemed to have a bit of a down game, but luckily the Brewers were able to pick things up a little bit in game 2, right, Jack?
They did pick things up a little bit in game 2. They were able to win that one 7-5 over the Marlins. William Contreras coming out of the gates hot in that one. He drove in 3 of the Brewers' first runs to start that game. Robert Gasser was on the bump. He went 6 innings, helping out that bullpen after they had to work pretty hard the night before. Getting that length from him was big. So the line for Gasser is interesting. We're going to dive into this start a little bit more. We've kind of skimmed over some other ones, but this one we're going to get a little more technical over because there's a lot to kind of break down here. So 6 innings, 10 hits allowed, 5 runs, 4 of them earned. And in terms of the kind of contact he was getting, should not have had 5 runs on the line. He gave up 3 of those runs in the 6th inning, so that final inning of work, and it was just kind of death by paper cuts. They weren't hitting the ball really hard. They just kind of dinked and dunked him to death a little bit that inning. But again, you go back to no strikeouts in this game. So Robert Gasser is now sitting on 6 strikeouts in 17 innings. That is a 8.5% strikeout rates and 3.18 Ks per 9. That's just, you can't pitch in the big leagues with that little swing and miss, or I should say that little, that few of plate appearances ending in a strikeout, that many plate appearances ending in contact. And you talk about Gasser, it's a lot of balls in play so far, and they're not hitting him hard. He's got really, really good quality of contact metrics, 19.7% hard hit rate, only a 1.6% barrel rate. So I think that just means he's allowed 1 barrel basically, and an average exit velocity against of 84.6 miles an hour. Guys are not hitting him hard, but if it's only contact, this is going to happen. You got to strike some guys out, and this is just going to happen, because unless you want to rely on like a 150 batting average on balls in play, which doesn't happen unless you're Josh Donaldson last season in a season where he played like 40 games. It's not going to happen. It's not going to work, and you're going to be prone to some innings like this. So obviously there's more swing and miss in there. Gasser was more of a strikeout artist in the minor leagues. The question now is where is it going to come from now to get it in the big leagues? I think that it is a little bit of a product of just the approach that they've had to take on the mound so far. It's pretty obvious that really all they're telling him to do is just throw strikes.
Yep.
Like that is, if you look at the targets and you look at the pitch mix, Gasser even said it after his first 2 outings in the Brewers clubhouse. Like, yeah, I mean, all I'm really trying to do is just attack the strike zone, throw strikes, the cliches that guys repeat. But you can tell that's actually just all he's trying to do right now. Just making sure that he's in the zone. And you can also kind of tell because the pitch mix has not quite been the same as what we've seen in the minor leagues. So he's been really heavy on the sweeper usage so far, the sweeping slider, which I like a lot. That's his best pitch. I think, especially when he's facing lefties, just throw that thing like 60% of the time. It's very tough to pick up. He actually did leave a few more sweepers over the plate in this game. Jazz Chisholm got 2 hits against it, and they were both sliders that were basically down the middle. But that's kind of beside the point in just the larger context of this outing for what really caused some of the trouble. We got to start seeing more cutters, man. Like he has
Yep.
not thrown cutters very often. It's at like a 7% usage rate, and that is pulled down a lot from his first start. He didn't throw a single cutter, but that was one really, especially in his first start, you could tell it's just throw 4-seamers and 2-seamers, try to get him into righties, but just be in the strike zone and get some weak contact. That's all well and good, but this is where you start to talk about just the interplay between pitches. He's going to get more swing and miss with that 4-seamer if he's also throwing that cutter. Because right now, guys can kind of pick up when that kind of spin is coming out of his hand. It's a 4-seamer and it's easier to get to. Maybe not even for barreling, but just getting the bat to. He would get a lot of swing and miss with the 4-seamer in AAA because he's basically throwing from a sidearm slot, so he's got a really good vertical approach angle when he locates that ball up in the zone. The velocity is not terrible either. We've seen some 94s from him from that slot too. So that should make it effective against big league hitters. But I think just so much of this comes down to also throwing the cutter, which out of the hand is going to look almost identical, but it's going to be a different kind of movement pattern. It's not going to have the same level of carry through the strike zone. And then it's going to come in on a righty or away to a lefty, depending on who he's throwing it to. But just having that separation there is going to be key for getting those swings under the 4-seamer or even late on the 4-seamer to the point of getting a swing and a miss. I think we got to start seeing a little bit more of like it is kind of ironic actually, because if you listen to some of the broadcasts so far when he's been pitching, the commentary has been he's a pitcher, he's pitching. Like he's not trying to blow guys away, he's just in the strike zone throwing strikes, he's pitching. Ironically, I don't think he's actually quote unquote pitching as well as he could be if you're using the definition of like, oh, mixing, hitting spots, all this da 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 da. He's just not using one of his better pitches right now. Like there's more room to
Right.
do better pitching, like capital P pitching, if he mixes that in more. And that's not really his fault. It's the game plan the Brewers have had for him so far. But I do think we're going to need to start seeing that cutter more. I think that's kind of the missing link, and it's a good pitch. But we got to start seeing that a little bit more just so that we can kind of see everything come together in terms of more swing and miss on the fastball, better sequencing. He's getting whiffs on the slider and on the sweeper, and he's getting a few on the changeup too. But I think really like it just all comes down to not only is he getting swing and miss at all, but like how's the sequencing to the point where is he getting ahead in the count and then getting that strike 3 on a swing and a miss? And that's where it's going to come down to more just working more of these other pitches in, just being a little bit more well-rounded and using the version of the arsenal that we saw in the minor leagues.
Right. I feel like it needs to be pointed out that he struck out a lot of players last year. He led AAA in strikeouts, and you can argue, that was an accumulation stat. He was up there in terms of innings pitched out of all minor league or all AAA pitchers last year because he spent the whole season there, and not too many pitchers do that when they're performing really well like he did. But he also had the highest strikeout rate for any pitcher who had at least 90 innings pitched, and that was 60 pitchers in AAA last year. He had a 28% strikeout rate. So this is a guy who's very capable of missing bats and generating strikeouts. And while I don't expect him to strike people out at that rate in the majors, I do absolutely think he's capable of getting swing and missing, striking batters out. And like Jack said, I've got nothing to go any other direction in the pitch mix stuff. I think that's exactly what needs to change. The cutter needs to be used more. The sinker is performing better than I expected it to at the major league level so far, but I still don't think that's a very good pitch.
I'm surprised by that's really what he's been throwing at the expense of the cutter. He's throwing a lot more
Right.
2-seamers. It was almost like
Yeah.
as soon as he got to the big leagues, and this is purely speculative on my part, it almost seems like he got to the big leagues and the Brewers' 2 catchers just kind of plugged him into the same way they call pitches for a lot of their other starters, where it's just
Right.
mix the 4 and 2-seam at either an even rate or more 2-seamers, especially when you're facing a same-handed batter versus that 4-seamer. But that's not the best game plan for him. We got to see that cutter more.
Yes, 100%. So yeah, that's where I would take it. But I do think it's important to note that he's capable of striking people out. If this was a guy who's always been pitched to contact, I think it'd be a different story. I'd say we're probably getting about what we can get out of a guy like that. But for Gasser, he's very capable of missing bats and getting strikeouts and being able to get himself out of the jams that happen when you happen to give up a few singles because you just keep getting the ball in play. And Jack, you hinted at it, but over the course of a game or multiple games or whatever, there's eventually going to be a part where the hitters just sequence their singles together like the Marlins did because they're always putting the ball in play. Eventually, balls just for a stretch don't find fielders' gloves. And he still didn't really give up much hard contact during that inning, but it was just a matter of he couldn't get himself out of the inning by generating a strikeout. And that is the easiest way to get yourself out of trouble short of a double play. So yeah, he showed a lot of good stuff. And like his pitch count was in a great spot. He was able to get the Brewers 6 innings the day after a bullpen game, essentially. So it was all really important and he did fine, but I think there's a lot more left in the tank for him. And that's exciting in a way because we've seen what he can do even without using one of his best pitches, really hardly at all. So yeah, I think there might be a little bit more hope, honestly, for me that Gasser could turn into a little bit more than just a back to maybe mid rotation type guy. Like if they can find the pitch mix and get him to work both sides of what we've seen him do well with the soft contact and getting the swing and miss.
Yeah, I don't think we noted this yet, but we probably should go back to just the situation that the Brewers have been in just about every time he's taken the mound. Like they have been in spots where it's like, we need you to eat some innings.
Yep.
So that probably plays into the way that they're having him pitch a little bit. Like you need to be in the strike zone and trying to get outs early so that we can stretch you out more. And that definitely was a factor in this game. Like that's how you give up 10 hits and you still work fairly deep into the game for today's standards because he was in the strike zone so much. But I think hopefully in general, as we get into some other situations, they do adjust that game plan and go back more to what he was doing in the minor leagues. I think that also includes like just not being afraid to throw a pitch outside the strike zone.
Right.
Walks were an issue for him in the minor leagues coming up. And did I say this on here? Did I say it? I can't remember who I said it to, but I said it might have been a private conversation. I said to someone like, if there's anything that might get him in the big leagues, it's going to be the walks because he struggled with the walks. But now it seems like they've almost swung it too far in the other direction where it's like everything needs to be in the strike zone. We can't walk guys, like just can't have that happen. But then this is going to be a side effect of it sometimes, going back to the point about just, it's going to happen. Like it is not statistically possible to have a strikeout rate this low and avoid times where this happens. Like Gasser right now is still sitting on a batting average on balls in play of like under 300. And that's after he had this outing where there was arguably some just not so great luck based on the kind of contact he was getting. But like, that's just the reality of it. You cannot statistically have this many plate appearances. So if I do the mental math really quick, like 11.5% of your, or like 90% of your plate appearances, I'm really bad at mental math. But like 11, I'm really bad at math. God. Okay. So let's just say it's like 90% of his plate appearances, 91% of his plate appearances. I was doing like the roundabout. Is that what they taught you like in grade school? Like divide the problem up where it's like,
oh yeah,
I'm going,
yeah.
Yeah. So like, that's what I was doing in my head and it got caught up. So now everyone knows that I need to use a calculator for my math facts. But that's a story for another time. But back to Gasser, if like 90% of your plate appearances are ending with a ball in play,
yeah,
they're just statistically the way that this game has always worked, they're just going to become hits. Like that's just, you're not giving yourself enough room to work with in terms of things you can actually control and not have up to fate. So like you're going to see some things like this, but hopefully the mix changes a little bit and is a little bit more productive for him moving forward. I think we will see it as we just get into some situations where they maybe feel he has the room now to pitch in that way. And he has the room to maybe work with some walks or have outings where he's not working quite as deep. It probably is a little bit of a mix of just where they're at right now as a team and what they need from him. But we'll see what the future holds for Robert Gasser. We still have to finish talking about everything that happened in this game, though, so I'll try to get through it here. The Brewers coming back from behind to win this because Gasser did relinquish the lead in that final inning there. Brewers coming back in the 8th. Jake Bauers led it off with a double. William Contreras drew a walk, and then Christian Yelich hit a go-ahead RBI triple. So another extra base hit for Bowers, who we didn't note this in game one, also doubled in game one.
Yeah.
The Brewers having some bad luck on that one because it got lodged in the bottom of the fence. Monasterio would have scored from first to give them a 2-run lead in the ninth, which would have been enough to win, but he got held up at third. But bottom line is Jake Bowers continuing to hit really well. So we got a listener question about Jake Bowers asking, should Bryce Terang and Jake Bowers be playing every day with Terang's emergence and Hoskins out? So Bowers and Terang didn't get a lot of time in this Marlins series, especially in the starting lineup, because the Marlins were starting left-handed pitchers in this series. So both guys were starting the game on the bench. I think you could maybe make the case for Terang getting more at-bats against lefties because of the kind of style of play that he's hitting with now. It's just a very simplified short swing. I think according to the StatCast bat tracking, he actually does have like one of the shortest. They've quantified it now, one of the shortest swings in baseball. And I think that has a better chance of still playing even when you're maybe facing a guy from the other side where it is a tougher angle for you to pick up, just because you give yourself, in my mind, the way I see it, when you have a short swing like that, you don't have as much room for like super powerful, super productive contact, but you also have eliminated the potential pitfall for just completely unproductive swings of just swinging and missing or looking completely lost at the plate. So I think you can make an argument for Terang getting more time against lefties. I'm not going to say that for Bowers because it is still a profile that has a good amount of swing and miss. It's not quite as all or nothing as it was early in the season because the timing has been better with the toe tap, but it is still, he's going to swing hard. It's still a tough view for him against a lefty. Was it this? It wasn't this double that he hit against a lefty. It was, did he hit one or was it this one?
Yeah, because Puck faced him and Yelich.
Oh, that's right. Inning. Yeah, because I know he hit one of his doubles off a lefty in this series. So, okay. So it actually was a good spot to put the question in, especially here. But I would still say, granted, when the alternative is Owen Miller, that's not a great alternative to have. But I think for the most part, you're still best off trying to shield Bowers from lefties as best you can. But I think there's a little bit more room for Terang to get some time against lefties. What do you think?
Yeah, I think more than anything, it would have made sense for them to both maybe get one game in this series, where I don't think you need to give Monasterio and Miller 2 or all 3 games in that spot, just because regardless of if they're better against lefties overall, they're just not great hitters. And Monasterio had a fine series, so I don't want to knock him. He actually had a homer. He hit the ball decently, but I would not have hated seeing Terang. And I think Bowers hit the grand slam off a lefty as well. If I recall from
he did,
a
yes,
week or so ago.
So he's actually had some productive swings against lefties.
Yeah, he's been seeing it okay, it seems like. So I wouldn't have minded him. I can't say I'm upset that they didn't, but I also wouldn't have hated seeing both of them get at least one game in the starting lineup and just let them get out there and stay in rhythm more than anything. Because for a guy like Bowers, who's been hot, I don't fully buy into people being quote unquote hot and all that stuff, but I do think there's an element of just sitting there for 3 games. And obviously he pinch hit and he had 2 doubles in those situations, so he was fine. But I think that argument could be made that you just want to keep them in a rhythm and keep them on the field a little bit more often. But either way, I can't say I'm upset either direction, but I probably would have got them each one start out of the 3.
Final answer on this question for me is going to be shrug emoji. It doesn't move me a whole lot one way or the other. So yeah, we'll kind of leave it there. After the Brewers took the lead in this one, Tobias Myers actually pitched out of the bullpen first when they were down, but it was Tobias Myers, Yoel Payamps, and Trevor McGill combining for 3 scoreless innings to finish this one off and get the win. I want to have a quick sidebar here on Payamps. So I feel like going into the year, there were a lot of people who were like, well, this guy's a prime regression candidate. And I saw some people after he had a couple of rough outings kind of patting themselves on the back saying, yeah, he's turned into a pumpkin. I don't think that's actually what's happening here. And I already felt this way before his last couple games here. But I'll just break it down. So his last 3 appearances now, 3 1/3, no base runners, 5 strikeouts. And if you take it back to his outing against the Pirates on the last homestand where he gave up a run early, a home run, and then a double, and then he locked it in. If you take it back to that outing, he has now struck out 6 of his last 12 batters faced. And if you just take a holistic look of his season, he's allowed 8 runs, 7 of them have been allowed within 2 games. He's had 15 scoreless appearances out of 18 outings, which I actually think if there's something that needs to become a stat for relievers, it should be percentage of outings where he didn't give up a run, because the workload distribution is so much different than it is for a starting pitcher. So I don't know if you can necessarily evaluate them on the same scale like we do with a lot of metrics. So I think he's been a lot better this year than people realize. Just in terms of, you look on a game to game basis, and it's really just come down to 2 days where the slider just was not there at all,
Yeah.
and he was getting hit around with that pitch. But otherwise, I like a lot of what he's done so far this year. Most of the underlying metrics are about the same as where they were last year. The K rate's a little bit lower, but the whiff rate is about the same. And he's kept it the same in large part because he's made a couple of adjustments that I really wanted him to make going into this year. I really wanted to see more four-seam fastballs from him, and he's doing that now. He's throwing more four-seamers overall than he is sinkers. He's throwing a lot more four-seamers to right-handed batters, which is something I wanted to see him change. So I think under the hood, things are mostly fine for him. I'm not worried about him being a huge regression candidate. I think that it was just a product of 2 bad games early on, and we've already seen him kind of get back to what we're used to seeing. And I think the pitch mix is better this year. Just all of these things still have me feeling pretty optimistic about him. I don't know how you felt about him going into the year and how you feel now.
Yeah, I didn't fully buy into him being like a huge regression candidate. I thought that he probably got pretty much as you can get out of him last year. So maybe a little bit of regression coming. But like you said, there was still improvement to be made with the pitch mix. And we've seen that. And everyone probably remembers the outings where he just kind of got hit around a little bit. And like you said, it all came down to just not being able to command the slider. It didn't really have the same movement it normally does in either of those 2 outings. So I definitely agree. I like the idea of like a percentage of outings that you were scoreless in for relievers. I think that would actually be an interesting stat to track. I wonder if we can do that like with some sort of thing on Fangraphs. Anyway, but he's looked good lately. You can tell he looks more comfortable. He came back off the bereavement list about a week ago, I think, and since then it's looked good. Those are the outings pretty much since then that you were pointing out. And I still feel good about him. I like that they were able to get him some lower leverage opportunities to try and work through some stuff. I think that was a good call on Murphy's part. But I still trust him in high leverage spots. If he needs to come into a game, I'm still going to feel comfortable.
Game 3, we're going to recap this one in about 15 seconds. Freddie Peralta was really, really good. He went 7 innings, 4 hits. The only run he allowed was a leadoff home run to Jazz Chisholm. Walked a guy, struck out 7. The Brewers got shut out. They got 3 hits against Jesus Luzardo in his 8 innings of work, and then 1 more against Tanner Scott. But not a whole lot happening in this game. So the Brewers dropping their 2nd straight series. Was good to see Peralta get back on track. I only caught the first couple innings of this game, but I was kind of getting a here we go again feeling when he got behind to Chisholm on a series of pitches that were nowhere near the strike zone. And then he ended up having to throw one over the plate that Chisholm was ready for. It kind of seemed like a continuation of what we've been talking about with the command struggles, but he locked it in really nicely after that. Did a really nice job. So that was good to see from him. With that, we are going to move on to just a couple of loose ends here and get to some more of the listener questions that we had. We're running a little up to the wall on time here, but we'll try to answer as many of these as we can. We'll start with Ian, who asks about Tobias Myers. So he says Tobias Myers reminds him a lot of 2018 Chase Anderson. 2018 Chase Anderson, as he notes in this question, led the league in home runs allowed with 30. Tobias Myers led all of Double-A in home runs allowed last year, and he's allowed quite a few to begin his big league career. So Ian asks, do you think he has the ability to pitch like 2017 Chase Anderson? That was Chase Anderson's career year when he had an ERA under 3. Or will the home run ball always be an issue for him? I have an answer to this one, but I suspect it's the same answer. So Spencer, do you want to take this one so I can stop talking for a couple minutes?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, it's Ace Chanderson when we're talking about 2017. That was a special year for Chase. The home run's always going to be part of Tobias Myers' game. Like, it is going to be something that he deals with. So I think if he has a bit of, batted ball luck where guys are maybe popping the ball up or hitting deep fly balls a little bit more often than actually hitting them over the fence, you could see a season along the lines of Chase. But I think you're more likely to be looking at somewhere in between what 2018 Chase, or especially like 2019 Chase when he was out of a rope with the Brewers, and that 2017 version where he's going to give up home runs. He's probably a 4-ish ERA guy in a normal season. But he has the stuff to get strikeouts. He has the stuff to keep the ball off the barrel. It's just a matter of that fastball is always going to be a threat to get hit for power. It just is. It's the way it works. But it's also a pitch that he can use to generate swing and miss at the top of the zone. And it's not a bad pitch. It's just the type of fastball that gets hit out. And you can look at guys like Justin Verlander, who had a big run ball problem a couple of years ago, but had a really good season. Almost all the runs he was giving up were coming off the home run ball. And you can work around that as long as you're not a bunch of people, as long as you're not making a bunch of mistakes when you're in counts where you can strike somebody out. So home runs, I think, get a little overblown at times with starters, especially for relievers. It's a problem because that can change the game. And like we talked about with a reliever, it's a small sample. So solo home run is not a great outing when you give up a run as a reliever on the wider scale, I guess. But for a starter, you can work around giving up a homer or two as long as you're able to minimize damage around it with limited walks, limited mistakes and other counts to give up doubles, singles, anything, so that people aren't on base all the time for homers. So do I think he's ever going to have the ERA that 2017 Chase had over the course of a season? No. Do I think he could be a solid version that's kind of like that type of pitcher that Chase Anderson was? Yeah, I think that's reasonable to look at it that way. But I don't know, Jack, I may have taken it a little different than you did, but what are your thoughts?
I actually did. I was a little surprised. I mean, the stuff you talked about with the fastball is I was thinking that too. Like the way it's shaped, it's basically going to be either he gets a swing underneath it for a whiff or a pop up or a shallow fly ball, but when he misses and guys are able to get to it, it's going to be loud contact, and that's going to mean home runs. You're going to be able to tell when he makes a mistake with that pitch because it's probably going to get hit very hard in the air, which is not a great mix. But I think for him, really the key for making sure that those mistakes with the four-seamer don't hurt him a lot is going to be that cutter. I really think that's going to be huge for him. He's thrown it a lot so far in the big leagues, like way more than he did in either AA or AAA in the minor leagues. And in his last relief outing against the Marlins, I think he only threw, it was one inning granted, but he only threw 2 four-seamers. The rest of his fastballs were cutters. And I think that's really going to be big for him, making sure that guys aren't always able to get to those mistake four-seamers, or just not throwing as many four-seamers, thereby reducing the number of four-seam mistakes you make. But just having that cutter that comes out of his hand at a similar spin axis, but has a different movement pattern, it's going to have a little bit of downward movement and then that cutting action. I think that's really going to be big for him moving forward. So we'll see how it all kind of comes together in terms of the pitch mix, but I think we're going to see a lot of cutters, and that's going to be a big part of any success that he has. Moving on to our next question, Quentin asks, is Bryce Terang the Sal Frelick that was promised? This might be my favorite question we got this week because I actually think it is a good point. Like what we're seeing Terang do right now is basically what I thought we were going to see Sal Frelick do, but Sal Frelick's not doing it. Terang's got just a really short swing right now where it's maybe not a lot of power. I think I was still hoping for a little bit more just gap doubles power from Frelick than we've seen even from Terang so far this year. But generally just the nice short, shoot the ball to all fields, get on base a lot, and then run and let the speed and the defense bring a lot of value on top of that. That's basically what I thought Sal was going to be doing, but it's Bryce Terang doing it instead.
It's a pretty fitting I mean, it makes sense to me. Like it basically is what we were promised with Sal, and that's what we're getting out of Terang. So yeah, I mean, we've talked about Terang a lot and how he's surprised us this year, and I would say the same with Frelick in a bad way. I've been surprised by how Frelick has performed. So yeah, it's pretty much the exact type of profile we were looking and hoping to get out of Frelick, and Bryce is putting it together and doing it exactly how we would hope. It also, I will say, gives me a little bit of hope that Frelick will eventually figure things out as he continues to get more experience, but we're getting to that point where he's got enough experience where he should start making adjustments. And we kind of saw it happen with Terang in the offseason, which is probably the more likely time you see that happen with Frelick. But yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it really is pretty accurate. I think that's exactly what we're getting out of Terang right now.
Final question that we'll take for this section. Again, sorry if we didn't get to yours, but just in the interest of time, we're trying to do the best we can. Final question we're going to take for this section comes from Anthony. He asked, with all the pitcher injuries and perhaps underperformance from some, are there any realistic starters on the trade market you think the Brewers could target? And then he goes on to list Luzardo, who we just saw, as an option that he likes because he's got a few years of club control remaining. I'll kind of start with this one. I'm still not a huge proponent of the Brewers trading for a starter this year because they're so good at development in-house. I'm not sure it's quite the best use of their resources, but at the same time, it is a need. And if they do need to maybe swap from their outfield depth or something and make a kind of deal there, I think that's something you have to consider. But obviously, a guy like Luzardo is going to have a really, really high price tag. I don't think that's worth pursuing for the Brewers. Just stay in house at that point and see what you can develop. I think if you're looking at external additions, you can try to poach someone off the waiver wire or sign a free agent. I know Brad Keller's out there now. I wrote about him earlier this week as a guy I'd like to see the Brewers pick up. When I wrote that, he was still on waivers, but he did clear and he was released. So now he's a free agent as of this recording. So you can sign him for a cheap deal, plug him into that rotation. If we're talking trade candidates, I do like Eric Fetty quite a bit from Chicago, from the White Sox. I'm a big believer in the pitch mix changes that he made in Asia last year. And so far, he's had some pretty solid results on the season. He comes with a year of control on him past this year as well, because he signed a 2-year deal. But again, it always comes down to the price tag, which is really, really hard to project. Do you have anyone who you've kind of looked at already, Spencer? I know it's pretty early.
Fetty was my guy. You took my answer. I've always thought I always look at like the A's and try and figure out if anybody would be interesting from a team like that. Paul Blackburn would be kind of interesting to me, but he doesn't strike anyone out, so it really wouldn't be anything too exciting there. Fetty was really the one name that, and I know we had been asked a question about him at one point too, but he feels like the guy that's going to end up getting, the White Sox will probably get someone to overpay for him, so I can't imagine he's going to be super easy to get. But he does have one more year of control after this year, which certainly wouldn't hurt things in terms of maybe having to swallow giving up a decent prospect on our end. But I don't know. I do think you could go out and find, like you said, I mean, a Brad Keller, that type of guy off of waivers, off of the free agent market. Even a smaller trade. I don't have any names, but just guys who are hanging around in AAA who maybe have been in the majors before, like we saw with Tehran last year. Those types of guys where the Brewers do pretty well with just maximizing their abilities and getting the most out of them and then kind of cycling through them when they stop working. So I think they can get by doing that, but I don't hate the idea of adding somebody. I just don't know that there are a ton of great fits because most of the solid pitchers are going to be on good teams already at this moment. So there won't be too many, I think, hitting the trade market by the time the deadline comes around.
I know I was going to jump in and say, I remember looking at Blackburn over the offseason as kind of a potential trade target. And I don't remember any of the specifics because this was a few months ago. But I just remember coming to the conclusion, like there's some interesting stuff in the arsenal here where if you get him into that Milwaukee pitching development system, maybe they can kind of get another gear out of him. So I'd still be open to that now. I haven't really followed how his season is going so far over in Oakland, but he's a name to write down, I think. But
it appears he's on the 15-day IL with a stress fracture in his foot. So
okay. So
right
maybe
join to the IL.
Yeah, we how many starts has he made this year? Do you know? Do you have it up in front of you?
He has made eight starts.
Okay, so I'm guessing that was a recent placement.
Yeah, it was.
He might be out
May
for a bit.
13th.
Okay, yeah, he might be out for a bit. So we'll see if he's even healthy by that time. But I guess that'll wrap up this section of the pod, which means we get to move to Spencer's favorite section, his minor league sandbox. So I'm gonna let you just kind of take it away for however many minutes you have allotted to this segment.
Wow, I've been given unlimited time. Everyone heard that, right? Jack said I can talk for however long I want. We'll start with a few questions here. We got one from McNam003. He said and asked, every week Spencer gets excited about prospects I've never even heard of. Can this be done in regards to every minor league system? Are the Brewers that deep in the minors? So I guess to answer the first question, there are, I guess, hidden gems in every minor league system where if you're digging deep enough, you'll find a reason to be excited about players. But in terms of what the Brewers have, I do think they have a deep minor league system in comparison to a lot of other organizations. When you talk about pitching wise, especially, I felt like they came this season really underrated. And there have been a lot of breakouts on the pitching side of the ball. Offense has been a bit slow to start the year, and you haven't really seen, like in the past, you had some pretty big breakouts. You saw Churio breakout, you saw Luis Lara breakout, you saw guys like Brock get off to a great start in pro ball, all those types of things. And you haven't really seen too many of those other than at the lowest levels of the minors so far this year. But I do think the Brewers have a really deep system. I think when they do like the updated farm system rankings, despite losing a guy like Churio and maybe Gasser at that point and Ortiz and Hall, I still think they're going to rank pretty well under all of the different organizations who do those rankings. So that is a testament to the type of depth that they have. And if you look at those lists, you'll see that like 15 through 30 differ quite a bit for all of the different sites, which is a pretty good sign that they have a lot of depth, because those are just kind of, going back and forth. And they've got all of them, the main ones especially, have different lists in that regard. And that means all of those guys are pretty interesting for different reasons. So we also got a question from Corinna Salkold. They asked, I was wondering what you think of Caleb Bowman. Do you think he could make it to AAA or the majors? Does he have closer potential? So Caleb Bowman was signed out of indie ball prior to or at the beginning of last season. He is in AA now. He just turned 27 yesterday, it looks like, and he's carrying a .95 ERA. So based on pure results, it's hard to argue with what he's been able to do so far. I think in terms of being a closer, I'd be pretty surprised. This is a guy who strikes out under 8 batters per 9. The strikeout rate is like 21%. So that's not really what you would expect out of a closer very often. But I do think he's a guy who could potentially pitch in the major leagues in more of a lower leverage type of situation. His fastball's in like that 92 to 94 range. He throws a forkball for his changeup, and it's actually pretty gross at times, although I have seen it's one of those pitches that can be hard to command from time to time, and I have seen days where he just can't throw it where he wants it at all. But the forkball's a pretty good pitch, and that's the type of pitch that could generate swing and miss and potentially raise that strikeout rate a little bit. And then the slider is an okay pitch as well. I haven't been able to watch him much at AA this year because they only have, for the Biloxi home games, they only have the behind the plate footage from like up near the press box. So it's pretty hard to get a read on anything pitchers are actually doing during those games. But this is a guy who I could maybe see making the major leagues at some point. Definitely wouldn't say he'd ever close in the major leagues, but it's an interesting arm, and it's just another example of the Brewers going into indie ball and finding guys who are potential major league pitchers, which isn't necessarily easy to do, and giving them the opportunity to possibly do that. And then Jake McKibben asked, what 3 Brewers do you think have the best chance to be effective starters in the major leagues, and with the qualifier that they have to be under 21 years old right now? So I went with Yohanner Herrera, Bishop Letson, and Manuel Rodriguez. I've talked about all 3 of those guys on prior episodes, but all of them have been pitching quite well early on. They all started in Carolina. Herrera is now in high A. All of them are striking out. Hitters at a decent rate. Rodriguez less than the other 2, but he is walking batters at less than 1 per 9 right now. So just a lot to like with all of them. Letson and Herrera especially have the stuff to move pretty quickly through the system despite their age. Rodriguez is more about pitchability and command. If there's going to be another name that would maybe pop out and pass a guy like Rodriguez, it's probably Josh Noth, the competitive balance round pick from last year. I worry that might be a arm just because of his delivery, and I don't trust the command growing like it. I think Letson's going to have really good command, and I think Herrera has made huge strides in that regard. I'm not so confident in Noth just because of the delivery and what I see so far, but he has the stuff to be really good if he can put it all together. He can be mid to upper 90s already. Really good curveball, really good slider, changeup that he is working on and flashes at times. So Herrera, Letson, and Rodriguez would be my 3, and then a little honorable mention for Josh Noth. We'll move on from the questions and just start highlighting a few of the pitchers that have been performing well of late. Casey Hunt, he was an undrafted free agent out of Mississippi State in last year or after last year's draft. He was just recently promoted to high A after dominating in Carolina. The fastball is 93 to 95. It plays well at the top of the zone more than anything else, but can kind of sneak it past you, low and away, and that outside corner. And he does command it pretty well when he tries to go there. I wouldn't be surprised if he has decent extension. It seems like it gets hit on hitters better than what the velocity would tell you. The slider is a really, really good pitch. It's been 84 to 87. It's really, really sharp, and it gets a ton of swing and miss. The curveball is more in that 78 to 81 range, and he's been leaving it up a lot when I've been watching. When he does get it down, it seems to generate some swings, but he's left it up, and that's where the majority of his extra base hit damage has been done, is against that curveball. And then the changeup is more in the same velo range of the slider, maybe a little bit higher in the upper 80s. And that shows pretty good flashes as well, especially when he can get it down to lefties. So it's a legitimate 4-pitch mix for a reliever and a guy who, for an undrafted free agent, he was, I should note, picked in the 12th round by the Pirates the year before and decided to go back to Mississippi State. So this was a guy with some juice. And I've seen on Twitter, Mississippi State fans have been complaining because they thought their pitching coach was terrible and that he was wasting Casey Hunt's potential. So it may have been a diamond in the rough that the Brewers were able to find here, and somebody who's performing really well. And like I said, he's already been promoted once this year. So, but out of 916 pitchers in minor league, both at least 20 innings pitched, he is in the 90th percentile in whiff rate at 40.1% and swinging strike rate at 19.3, and then in the 99th percentile in strikeout rate at 42.5%, which is 5th in all of minor league baseball. And he's only carrying a 5.7% walk rate. So striking a lot of people out, getting a lot of swing and miss, not walking many people. It's hard to ask for too much more from a guy. And when you combine it with, I would say, a plus slider and then 3 other pitches that play pretty decently when he's locating, that's a guy who I would be on the lookout for as a potential reliever down the line. Moving on to Tate Keener. He was the 7th round pick last year out of Louisville, where he was in more of a swingman role. He started a little bit, but he mostly was in a long relief role. He's been 94. I've seen him up to 95. His junior year of college, he was more 88 to 90, and then he made a decent jump his senior year. And it's been sticking so far as a starter for the Timber Rattlers. So he added that velocity. He's got more run than it had in college, and he throws from a pretty low slot. So it plays pretty well down because of that run, but it also plays up because he's got a really good vertical approach angle due to that low slot. So interesting look, interesting fastball. I would say an above fastball on the whole. He throws a sweeper that looks really good. And then the changeup was pretty bad in college, and I think it's made some strides already. There's a Brewers PD video that came out, I think the same day we're recording this, that showed him with 8 strikeouts and 5 shutout innings in his last outing. And the changeup was really good in that one. And then he also seems to have added a shorter slider to go with that slower sweeper as well. So he has like a slider in that 85 mile per hour range, and then the sweeper is more in the 80 mile per hour range. So interesting pick, 7th rounder, barely any signing bonus given, and performing pretty well. He's in the 87th percentile in strikeout rate. His whiff rate is in the 91st percentile at 35.8, and his ground ball rate is in the 84th percentile. So like I said, he can get the ball on the ground and generate whiffs, which is always a good combo. We got Sam Gardner, who was signed out of Indy Ball in 2022 as well. He pitched in the Australian League this year. He only gave up 1 run. He struck out 19 per 9, which is a sign of that league isn't great, but he did really well, and it's always good to see good results for somebody who goes there. He's 92 to 94 on his fastball. I've seen him get a little bit higher than that. I think he's touched 97 before. His curve is his best secondary, and it gets a lot of his swing and miss. But he's in the 98th percentile in strikeout rate this year, which is 39.2%, which is fantastic, and 90th percentile in strikeout to walk ratio. So again, somebody who strikes out a lot of people and doesn't walk many is always somebody to keep an eye on. And then his FIP right now is sitting at 1.73 versus 3.5 ERA. So it feels like he's probably performing a bit better than his surface stats might show. And then for Logan Henderson, we talked about him last week, just a quick update. He made his 2nd rehab appearance in the Arizona League. He went 2 2/3 innings with 5 strikeouts and 2 hits allowed. So far, he's thrown in 2 games, 4 2/3 innings, 10 strikeouts, no free passes. I haven't checked on this, but he was lined up to start again tonight if he was going to continue to pitch down there. So I'm not sure if he is or if he isn't, but he's very clearly too talented for that level. It's just a matter of when he's built up enough to go make starts for the Timber Rattlers, because that is where he's heading after he's done. And then to wrap up the minor league stuff with our offensive side of the ball, just a quick update on Tyler Black. He is up to 6 home runs now on the season, a 131 WRC plus, and he's 7 for 8 on steals. I would say the defense has improved a little bit at first base, but I think there's still a ways to go. And with Bowers performing like he is right now, I'm not sure there's much of a chance we see him again too soon, barring injury. But I do think he's making improvements. So hopefully he continues to get work there, and we at some point can feel comfortable with him over at first base. And then this is the first one. I really don't know how to say his name, but I'm going to go with Louis Alastre. He was a 2023 international signing. He's got a 142 WRC plus so far with 7 extra base hits, including a home run. He was player of the week for the Arizona Complex League last week. He's showing some additional pop, like I mentioned, with those 7 extra base hits and the homer. But more than anything, he's showing really good bat-to-ball skills. He's got a 16.9% strikeout rate and a 9% walk rate. Reports are that he has plus speed, at least at the time when he signed. He's 6 of 7 on stolen bases. The feedback on his arm varies. Some people said he has a plus arm. Some people said he's got a terrible arm. So I really don't know what to read into on that. But the fact that he moved off of shortstop and is mostly playing left field this year makes me think that the arm probably isn't great. But the bat looks really interesting. I know this was a guy, there were some people early on reporting that the Brewers were pretty excited about him after he signed, and that they really love his approach at the plate and think he's going to be able to tap into a little bit more power. And so far this year, it seems like he might be. So could be a guy we see at Carolina at some point. And then an Eric Batanti update from last week. He had 2 homers the week before. He hit another 2 this week. He's up to 4 now. His strikeout rate is down under 30, which doesn't sound great, but it started terribly. It's been much better for the last 2 weeks. The walk rate is over 14%. And I've been seeing some people on Twitter, some actual scouting / like fantasy or real life scouting people on Twitter who have been comping him to a young Kobe Mayo and saying that that's the type of potential he does have. And we all know how much most of the fan base wanted Kobe Mayo in the Burns trade. So somebody with that type of potential is pretty exciting. He's definitely a ways away still, but one to watch because the power is tremendous. Brewers PD put out a video of all 4 homers, 3 of which went to the opposite field, and just easy power to the opposite field, which is not common for an 18-year-old. And then a quick Filippo Dituri update. We talked about him last time. Again, he got a bunch more buzz this week. I know Kurt Hogue tweeted some video of him and talked about how there's been some talk about him around the league. And like I mentioned last week, Fangraphs had him as a pick to click for one of their scouts, really liked him. He seems like one of those guys who doesn't have the tools that jump out so that everybody gets really, really excited about the huge ceiling. But he also has a lot of the tools that make a player like just a solid major league regular. And he's got just really good bat to ball skills. There was a video of his from the left and right side. I would say the left side looks a lot better to me than the right side. I'm not even sure I would keep him hitting right-handed after seeing the video from that side, but the left-handed swing is really smooth. I think he's got the ability to hit the ball gap to gap more than anything else. And the defense is good. He's got a really good arm. So definitely someone to continue watching. And then just along the lines of those last 2 guys, we did get one more question from Tyler Labs asking, what's the delay in promoting Batanti and Dituri to Carolina? Given the Brewers' propensity to challenge their young standouts, I'm a bit surprised those 2 are still in the complex league. So one, I would say Batanti's really young. Like he was 17 when the Brewers drafted him. This would be maybe the youngest player in Carolina if he got called up there. He'd be very close. I think they want to see him adjust to the pro ball game, let him see some more pitches. But I do think you'll see him in Carolina before the season ends, again, barring some sort of injury. And for Dituri, I think it's similar. He's very young as well. And it's just getting him the more opportunities to kind of adjust. And the fact there's just a lot of young talent at low A and high A right now, which means they would have to push other people up in order to make sure everybody's playing. And that could be tough because there aren't really any players that have shown that they absolutely deserve to be pushed from those 2 levels. So it's kind of a numbers game more than anything else for me because they are doing exactly what you would want them to do. And then quickly, he asked, building off of that, do you see any trends in the Arnold era regarding midseason promotions? So I would say in general, they're pretty aggressive. I think some of the players not getting promoted have surprised me over the last couple of years in terms of like Logan Henderson never making it to high A last year surprised me a lot. I cannot believe Craig Yoho is still pitching for the Timber Rattlers. That is just mind blowing to me. He should be in Double A. He might be able to pitch in Triple A right now. I genuinely think he could pitch in the major leagues this year if they pushed him fast enough. But for the most part, I still think they're being pretty aggressive, and especially with younger players, which you kind of hinted at before, you can usually read into the way they promote young players. Like a guy like Yoferi starting in Carolina is a pretty good sign that they really truly believe in him a lot, because even Churio started an extended spring training before skipping the Arizona Complex League. So you can read into some of that. Bishop Letson starting there is a good thing. But it's, for the most part, these mid-season promotions, they just happen randomly. It's not like you see a ton of movement at the All-Star break for different leagues or anything. They kind of do it as needed, and then if they really feel like somebody has proven themselves at one spot, then they'll push them up. I don't think it's different than what we've seen in the past. But Jack, if you want to jump back in and let me stop talking for a few minutes here and take over for these injury updates, that would be fantastic.
That is more than okay with me. I should have really put a time limit on you, but here we are.
I got 4 questions, Jack.
As if that minor league segment wasn't long enough. We got a lot to cover here in terms of injury updates. So we're going to start first by talking about Joe Ross again. We kind of touched on this earlier. He was placed on the 15-day IL with a low back strain. Sounded like this is something that he was dealing with going into that start, and it just kind of locked up on him some more after that first inning. So Pat Murphy made it sound like they're really hoping for a minimum stay. Back injuries can be tricky. We'll see if that actually pans out. So we'll kind of find out as we go along here how much time he's going to miss. DL Hall made his first rehab start in Appleton on Sunday. I went to go watch that game. Looked pretty good in the 11 pitches he threw. The fastball velocity, every fastball was at 94, 95. And he said after the game that they're looking at just keeping him in one inning stints for a little bit. He's with the Nashville Sounds right now. Actually made his first appearance there tonight. And the plan going into that was just kind of keep him in shorter stints for now, just to see the velocity and make sure it's there. And then hopefully, if things are looking well, they'll think about maybe building it up a little more and hoping that he can maintain it, and then seeing if they're willing to stretch him out a little bit more. He said right now it just helps him a lot to have that lower half under him so he can generate more of that velocity. He uses his lower half a lot as he drives off the mound. So having that knee back would be really nice. Unfortunately, we don't know for sure that the knee is fully healthy because he left his outing tonight in Nashville. This is according to my colleague Spencer Michaelis. I didn't watch this outing, but he was sitting 94, 95 in that inning, touched 96, and he came off the mound limping and just not looking pleased with what he was feeling in that moment coming off the mound. These are your words in the notes here, but
correct. Do you want me to elaborate a little bit on that?
You can a little bit, yeah, because I didn't see this.
Yeah, so I went back and watched it, and the second to last pitch, he looked like he grimaced a little bit, and then the last pitch, he struck out the hitter on a high fastball. But as he landed, he looked really uncomfortable the whole time, and he kind of jumped off the mound, using his right leg, using his front leg. And then he started walking off, and it wasn't like a huge limp or anything, but he was saying some words that start with F and U, and I don't think he was yelling fun. So he wasn't in the greatest of moods leaving the mound, and he looked a little uncomfortable. So hopefully it was just, you never know. It could have been a cramp. It could have been anything. You don't really know. But he definitely didn't look happy, and it wasn't a great sign because he did look good. And I should point out, it wasn't just the velo, but because we have Statcast in Nashville, he did have 2 to 3 more inches of that induced vertical break on his fastball as well. So seeing some of the characteristics you'd want to see out of the fastball beyond the velocity. So it would be a bummer if he had a setback with the injury, but hopefully by the time you guys all hear this, we have an update and it's nothing, and it was just a little bit of a scare. But that's what I saw when I did watch the video.
Switching to the position player side for a couple seconds here, Garrett Mitchell sounds like he's getting closer to a return. He's going to start swinging off a tee on Friday when the Brewers start their series against the Red Sox. So that'll be his first time getting into the swing of that again. No pun intended. Next up for him is going to be some at-bats in Arizona, and then they're looking at a rehab stint Right now, Mitchell is targeting June 17th in Anaheim against the Angels. That series is when he's looking at for a potential return to the big leagues. Rhys Hoskins, who's dealing with a hamstring injury, started running on Monday earlier on this road trip. Again, just as a recap, he's hoping that it won't be a super long stay for him. Pat Murphy said 2 to 4 weeks. I think Hoskins is kind of hoping he's on the shorter end of that timeline, but we'll see what it looks like for him. He doesn't want to go on a rehab assignment when he's ready to return, so he's trying to get back as soon as he can. Jacob Junis, who's been out for quite a while now, through a bullpen session in Miami on Tuesday. It was about 80% intensity, just fastballs and changeups. He's going to be throwing again on Friday, mixing in that slider more, which is really the centerpiece of his arsenal. Earliest he can come back from the IL because he's on the 60-day would be June 2nd. My speculation is it's probably going to be a little bit longer than that, just as the Brewers are trying to decide what they're going to do with him. Pat Murphy did say during pregame a few weeks ago when the Brewers were at home that they're kind of leaning towards maybe bringing him back in a 1 to 2 inning relief role, or maybe a little bit more of a hybrid role, not wanting to get him fully stretched out because they don't want to push that shoulder too much. We'll kind of see where everything's at with the pitching staff when that time comes, as he's getting back into a rehab assignment. Devin Williams, who is dealing with stress fractures in his back, has not appeared in a game this year. He played catch for the first time since being shut down towards the end of spring training. He played catch on Saturday in Houston last Saturday, and he's hoping that he can be back on the mound in the big leagues by late July. So again, you're probably looking at kind of the timeline we were expecting going in, missed first half, and then coming back after the All-Star break. And then finally, JB Bukauskas, who is dealing with that lat/tricep injury. He played catch for the first time last week, Friday. No word yet on what the timeline looks like for him. Sounds like they're being kind of cautious. So we'll see what the future holds for him. But a lot of Brewers who are still on that injured list. So a lot of updates for us here tonight. And we'll wrap up the show by previewing the next couple series that the Brewers have coming up. So they are going to wrap up their road trip with a 3-game series in Boston that starts on Friday night. In game 1, we're going to have Bryce Wilson on the bump. Cutter Crawford is going to be on the hill for the Red Sox. I was really happy to find out last year when the Brewers were playing the Red Sox that Cutter Crawford does indeed throw a cutter. If that had not been the case, that would have been extremely disappointing. Game 2, or I should add, game 1, that first pitch for that one is at 6:10 p.m. Central Time. Game 2, it is Colin Ray against Nick Pivetta. Hopefully we get a Colin Ray special. That game is at 3:10. And then the Brewers have not officially, as of this recording, announced a starter for game 3, but it would be Robert Gasser who's lined up to start that one. So that's who I would expect to see get the ball. And he is going to be facing Tanner Hook in that game. That one is going to be a getaway day. That's going to start at 12:35 p.m. Central Time. And then the Brewers are going to come home from that extended road trip, and they are going to be seeing a familiar friend turned foe, depending on who you ask, in Craig Counsell. He and the Cubs are going to be pulling up to American Family Field for the first time this year. So that will definitely be an interesting series coming up. All kinds of storylines that I'm sure we'll have for you at this time next week. Spencer, do you have any final words you would like to impart on our listeners as we wrap this one up, or have you said your piece?
I will say one thing. I will always maintain that Craig Counsell is a good manager, and I always will appreciate what he did here, but I hope he gets booed a lot on Monday. I hope people are mean to him. Not in a terrible way. Don't go after his family or anything, but he deserves to hear it. He absolutely
his park in Whitefish Bay. Don't go after his
No, you can go after the park. That's awesome.
Oh, okay.
Don't go after. Leave his family out of it. That is the one thing I think you absolutely need to do. Don't cross lines, but he deserves to hear it, and I hope he does.
Well, we'll find out what the reception is for Craig Counsell when he comes back to Milwaukee for the first time, and we'll be able to recap it for you at the same time next week, next Friday. Until then, thank you all for listening. As a reminder, you can follow each of us on our Twitter pages. You can find me at @ByJackStern. You can find Spencer at SMichaelis234, and you can follow the podcast at BF_pod. As a reminder, that is the Twitter page that you should send your questions to, not my replies, not Spencer's replies. We put it in every tweet that we send out in the middle of the week calling for questions, that you should send it to the podcast channels, not directly to us, but some people, I guess, just don't want to take the 10 seconds of their time to read the full disclaimer. So next time I send that out, I might put like I don't know, like 85 emojis and all caps and something in there just so people see it. But we just do it that way because it's a lot easier for us as we're planning each of these episodes. These are some lengthy episodes, so there's a lot that goes into putting this together, and it's just easier for us to process questions if they're all in one place where we can look. It just kind of streamlines that process for us. But we'll be happy to answer as many of your questions as we can next week. Until then, thank you all for listening, and go Brewers.